Okay, I've been level 25 for a little bit now, got full legendaries on the Druid, have played with basically all of the builds that I can with the skill points I have available. I've tried the werewolf one, tried the bear type stuff, really liked the earth bending style as well, tried the wind, tried the electric. Okay, I've messed around with all of these skill trees more or less. Now, I haven't got every single legendary item in the game, but I've tried some pairings, and currently I have like the shred dash poison one. I've also got kind of like a storm secondary availability. I've tried the defensive one. So we've tried a tanky one. We've tried a companion summon. So I've tried a few different one of these. And because of this, one of the things I noticed right off the bat with the Druid is the class that I have felt like has the biggest variety, which you would think with the class. Like, you would think it would be like World of Warcraft, where it's like, hey, I have the biggest spread of like support type of abilities, or I really have this single target bleed type of damage builds, or I have the really tanky bear stuff. The Druid does fit that role, and that actually is pretty spot on. Like, I do actually feel like when I am doing these different builds, like there is a significant enough variety in the builds and play styles. So that has been very different. I'm either full melee or I'm full ranged. Now, the thing I want to say about the Druid is, unfortunately, the Druid, I think, also requires the most amount of correct legendary items and the most amount of skill points to actually begin enjoying. I really didn't like this Druid at all until the later 20s, and even then it's been somewhat questionable, and I've had to find an exact build I like and get a couple legendaries to work with the build. The reason for this is the base of what the abilities do don't seem to do enough. Like, for instance, if I'm doing the Earth build, and I was doing Earth Spike, and again, we're only level 25, disclaimers about being a beta side, okay? I was doing the Landslide Earth Spike combination, which is really cool because of kind of the immobilizing and stun and everything it can do. But what you really had to do in order to get this one to work is you had to get the Landslide's Earth Pillars legendary, and then I had to go all the way and double down on the landslide, right? And then you had to get like the combination of ones like this where you can use the earthen bulwark, etc. So I had to find multiple ways, and then use the barrier damage, etc. I had to find multiple ways to get the abilities to actually work before it started feeling good. Whereas opposed to like Sorcerer or Necromancer that I've played so far, it almost immediately, just the abilities themselves were enough to carry. So what I'm trying to say is the Druid seems like it has the most variety potential in terms of when you're playing it, how much you're going to be expanding upon the character. However, because of that, you start at such a baseline that's almost unintuitive, almost unenjoyable, that I think a lot of people are absolutely going to hate the Druid at the start because it can feel brutal. You feel pretty good like level 1 to 5 while you're going through with Claw and Shred, and you're just being a werewolf. Then once you start getting into like the teen levels, it starts to feel like you're slowing down significantly. Maybe not if you get the right legendaries off the bat, but it did not feel very good using like the tornado build in the beginning, or using the lightning build in the beginning, etc. There's also the problem, and I think Kriparian put this very well in his video, where he was talking about the generation. For instance, on Barbarian, you have to actually, if I'm using the melee on Barbarian, I have to be generating Fury by attacking somebody, which means it's then depleting when I'm not attacking somebody. It's the inverse of mana. So therefore, when I'm having to run, which by the way, you have to run more often on melee than you have to run on the other classes, because you're closer in on stuff and you're having to dodge more. When you're on the range people, you're farther away. So when I'm playing a melee version of the Druid, like this werewolf version here, I am constantly having to be closer and also run away more often against bosses in particular than if I'm playing like a ranged class, okay? Which brought in a really weird play style where the melee class felt the strongest in terms of damage, but felt very terrible to play against the bosses. So what I ended up actually doing, which is completely hilarious, is we ended up summoning these wolves. You have these wolves, and I don't know why they've done this in the game, but the wolves have their own HP bar, but instead of making them like an actual minion, what they did was they gave them an absolute bajillion HP. So these guys can basically just tank bosses for the entirety of a boss fight. So if you get stuck and you are in, let's say you're full down all the way like me in the werewolf bleed tree, okay, but you're stuck and you can't be the boss, you literally can just summon the companion, switch your basic attack to the ranged one, okay, just be like, I'm just going to take the ranged one, and then literally just range somebody down, because the boss is going to attack your companion wolf the whole time. And because the boss focuses on the companion. If you run away from him long enough, you can get him to focus on the companion. And there's 2 of them. Now, if there's just one of them, it'd be a problem, because when one of them dies, which they will eventually die, but there's another one, and then they respawn quick enough that by the time he kills the other one, he switches to the other guy, then your other guy comes back, and you basically have this infinite tank. So, and you can see how much HP these guys have. It's ridiculous. Like, look how much damage I receive when they hit me. Okay, when I'm not on the immunity field, like, look, I receive a good chunk of damage. But then now look at the wolves. Look how much damage the wolves are receiving, and they've been tanking kind of this whole time. So you can start understanding very quickly that there's something weird about that mechanic, and that fact starts to dawn upon you when you're fighting bosses, and you're like, wait a minute, it's literally more efficient for me to just use flat out worse moves that do less damage, but just have the boss kill the companions. So for that reason, it kind of threw me out of my builds a few times when I was progressing. And if I was progressing maybe at a faster rate, or if I got better legendaries or something, maybe I wouldn't have felt the need to use that. But because the melee can feel so brutal in some bosses, and some of the bosses are most obviously not designed with melee in mind, then you start finding cheese strategies in order to actually beat stuff. And there's several times when I was progressing through both the campaign as well as the dungeons that we literally just beat it by having the companion wolves come out, and then the boss is sitting there attacking the companion wolf, and I'm like AFK just basic attacking until the boss is down. It was pretty much that simple, and that can be a little bit like, I don't want to say immersion breaking, but it can be frustrating when you've spent all your time focusing down on, I'm going to be a werewolf bleed guy. Okay, I'm going to do the werewolf bleed. You go all the way down that line, and then you realize that you get either 2 or 3 shot by the boss, and it's literally more efficient to do 10% of the damage, but just have your damage up the whole time. Because the fact is, when you're melee and having to dodge all these abilities all the time, unfortunately, your damage is often, your DPS is often just lower anyway, because you're not attacking as often. I have to constantly be running, but when I'm ranged, it's just so much easier. And I found myself wanting to play almost as just a worse sorcerer by using things like Boulder, by using things like Landslide with the Landslide legendary, by using, you know, the Hurricane, etc., which then makes me just feel like a worse caster as I went and played Necromancer or the Sorcerer, and it's very obvious from the beginning that they just do a better job of that. However, this is where I think it starts to get interesting with the Druid, because the Druid skill tree is especially nuanced for crowd control and defensive properties. Things like Cyclone Armor, things like Earthen Bulwark, and even the ability, for instance, of some of your legendary items to be able to, let's see, where is it? This one. Cyclone Armor also provides physical damage reduction. In addition, Cyclone Armor will be applied to all nearby allies. It obviously seems either designed for PvP or with party play in mind. So the Druid feels the most like a support out of all the classes I've played, but also comes to mind that I think he would be disgusting in PvP because of things like the Vine Creeper, for instance, here. Which what the Vine Creeper does is it constantly just follows you around and allows you to do this giant AoE that is going to immobilize everybody around you. And then things like Landslide that will immobilize, etc., or Boulder. You have a large variety of continual CC on this character. Even the ability Petrify, for instance, comes to mind. There is a lot of actual CC ability. See, this is Vine Creeper that will grab everybody and immobilize them. And so I would expect that the Druid could be quite good if we get into a position where either the PvE gets so complicated that what we need is lots of CC in order for us to beat that PvE, or the Druid could also be good in scenarios where you're doing PvP and your team needs team-wide AoE CC. Actually reminds me a little bit of the role of a Druid in World of Warcraft, funny enough, because of the CC potential there as well, and the single target and AoE CC, etc. So I actually find the Druid to be the biggest variety in gameplay. So if you're wanting to have the capability to do almost like a sorcerer type of build, and you're wanting the capability to be able to do an extremely tanky type of build with the things like the bear. If you want the capability of almost being supportive, but you also want maybe some CC and PvP, you might actually quite like it. However, if what you want is tons of raw damage, then you're going to want to play the class that's sitting next to me here in this same event. You can see while I'm struggling with one of these, his minions are running around and killing literally all of them. And that, of course, is the Necromancer, which you can just see I'm getting completely outclassed in terms of damage performance when it comes to it. I do want to say, though, that the Druid was getting better feeling quicker than the others, if that makes sense. So like, let me give you an example. Let's say the Barbarian started at 3, but by the time I was 25, it ended at like a 5. If the Druid started at that same 3, it got to that 5 by the time it's like level 15, and then by the end it would have been like a 7. So it was ramping in terms of enjoyability fairly quickly, but the problem is we don't have the full spirit boons yet, which unlock at an area we can't get to, so we can't do the quest. And on top of it, the Druid seems like you definitely need like all of the right legendaries to basically get this class to work, because there's so many variety in terms of builds. You have the Hurricane, you got the Lightning, all that. They're like half the legendaries are for a totally different build. So you, at the beginning, you're going to be mix and matching all these random legendaries. It's going to take you a minute to actually get all of the ones that you need or want fully for just your werewolf or just your bear or whatever. However, if you want to play a class that, like I've been saying, has the most variety, but also has the capability of being like extremely tanky or very good, what looks like single target, poison types of damage, has good PvP stun, the Druid actually might not be that bad. But you have to know it's going to be an investment of a class. Like it's going to take you a while, and I wouldn't expect to get there during the beta at all. It's going to take you a while to get Druid to be where you feel like a monster. Okay, I will say a few things in positiveness, which is that the werewolf and the werebear and all that, the animations are actually pretty good. It feels chunky when you're actually slapping around in those classes. The Druid itself, in terms of animations, are actually very beautiful. It's really when it comes down to how difficult it's going to be for a bit for you to get all the pieces together. And so at the beginning, you have the same problem of the Barbarian, like Riparian put it, where like you feel like you're running out of regeneration ability because you're constantly having to run, and you have to auto attack in order to gain spirit, etc. And then some of the passives seem quite good and some of the passives seem quite bad. So just my thoughts on it so far. It is only day 1, but I have been playing the Druid basically all day, and that's where I'm at for my initial impressions.